June the 13th, 1944. The hedgerows of Normandy, France. A lone Sherman tank, call sign Able 7, lumbered forward through the dense foliage, its tracks tearing through centuries-old earth. Inside the cramped turret, Sergeant Frank "Lucky" McCluskey squinted through his periscopic sight, the sweat stinging his eyes in the stifling heat. The air outside was alive with the metallic whine of insects and the distant, constant rumble of artillery. Then, a sudden earth-shattering roar. A shell, moving faster than sound, tore through the air, impacting a tree barely 50 yards to their left. The explosion ripped timber apart, showering Able 7 with splinters and dirt. "Tiger!" screamed the loader. Private Jenkins, his voice cracking with fear. McCluskey didn't need to be told. The distinctive, terrifying report of an 8.8 Siemens cannon was unmistakable. It was the sound of a German Tiger, a heavy tank, a beast of steel, and the bane of every Allied tank crew in Normandy. The Tiger. Its very name struck fear into the hearts of Allied soldiers. For McCluskey and his crew, fighting in their M4 Sherman, the encounter was almost always a death sentence. The Sherman, with its relatively thin armor and 75mm gun, was affectionately, or perhaps sarcastically known as Ronson by the Germans, a grim reference to a cigarette lighter that lights up every time. Facing a Tiger was like bringing a pocket knife to a sword fight. Yet, despite its legendary status, its seemingly impenetrable armor, and its devastating gun, the Tiger tank, the crown jewel of German engineering, ultimately failed to stem the Allied tide. It failed to protect the Third Reich from utter destruction. How could such a formidable weapon, arguably the most feared tank of World War II, lose to the very forces it was designed to annihilate? The answer lies not just in the cold statistics of armor thickness and gun penetration, but in a profound strategic failure that Germany could never overcome. A failure that America, with its humble Sherman, implicitly understood and exploited. This is the untold story of why Germany's unstoppable Tiger tanks fell to America's humble Shermans. It's a story of industrial might versus artisanal perfection, of strategic mass versus tactical terror, and ultimately of a fundamental misunderstanding of modern warfare. The myth of the Tiger tank began long before its first deployment. Its genesis was born from desperation and a harsh dose of reality on the Eastern Front. In June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. The Wehrmacht, confident after sweeping victories in Western Europe, expected a quick triumph. German Panzer IVs, the workhorses of the Blitzkrieg, were formidable against French and British armor. But then, they encountered something unexpected. Something terrifying. The Soviet T-34 medium tank and the KV-1 heavy tank. The T-34, with its sloped armor and powerful 76.2mm gun, could withstand German anti-tank fire and penetrate the armor of most German tanks. The KV-1 was even worse, a mobile fortress with armor so thick that early German anti-tank guns simply bounced off. This shocking encounter, far from being a minor setback, was a profound psychological blow. It exposed a critical weakness in German tank design philosophy. Up until this point, German doctrine emphasized speed, maneuverability, and tactical superiority through combined arms. Their tanks were good, but not necessarily superior in individual combat to every Allied design. They won by being faster, by better coordination, and by superior tactics. The T-34 and KV-1, however, signaled a shift. Individual tank quality suddenly mattered immensely. German tank crews, accustomed to technological superiority, found themselves in a terrifying new reality. Their 3.7cm PP-36 anti-tank guns, known derisively as the door knocker, were useless against the T-34's front glacis. Even the Panzer IV 75cm KWK-37 guns struggled. A Panzer Commission was immediately established, tasked with developing a new generation of German tanks that would surpass anything the Soviets or anyone else could field. Hitler, obsessed with large, powerful weapons, personally pushed for heavier designs. The result was the Tiger, developed by Henschel, the Tiger. I was officially designated the Panzerkampfwagen VX Tiger aus Führung E. It was a technological marvel for its time. Weighing in at a colossal 54 tons, 60 tons in combat, it was nearly twice the weight of the American M4 Sherman. Its most famous feature was its armor. The frontal glacis plate was 100 mm thick, perfectly vertical, making it incredibly difficult to penetrate for most Allied guns, at all but the closest ranges. The turret front was also 100 mm, and the sides and rear were 80 mm. This sheer thickness made it a rolling fortress. But the Tiger's true terror came from its main armament, the 8.8 cm Call Bill UK 36 Guard. This weapon was a derivative of the legendary 88 flak gun, which had already proven its devastating effectiveness against tanks in North Africa. It could punch through the frontal armor of any Allied tank, including the Sherman, at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. For a Sherman crew, typically armed with a 75 mm or 76 mm gun, engaging a Tiger meant getting within 500 meters, often less, to even hope for a penetration. The Tiger could often destroy 3 or 4 Shermans before they could even get into effective firing range. Its optics, famously German, were also superior, giving Tiger crews an undeniable first-shot advantage. The psychological impact of the Tiger was immense. Allied soldiers, especially tank crews, developed Tiger phobia. The mere rumor of a Tiger in the vicinity could slow an entire advance. British tankers even described seeing phantom Tigers in the fog, a testament to the dread it inspired. Individual Tiger aces like Michael Whitman achieved legendary status, credited with destroying dozens of Allied tanks in single engagements. The Tiger was not just a tank. It was a symbol of German engineering prowess, a terrifying embodiment of the Wehrmacht's might. Across the Atlantic, America's approach to tank development couldn't have been more different. When the U.S. entered the war, its primary concern was mass production. The logistical nightmare of fighting a two-front global war meant that quantity, reliability, and ease of maintenance were paramount. The M4 Sherman, developed by a consortium of American companies including Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors, embodied this philosophy. It was designed for simplicity, ease of manufacture, and mechanical reliability. Weighing around 30 tons, the Sherman was considerably lighter and smaller than the Tiger. Its armor, while decent for a medium tank, was thin compared to the German heavyweights, typically 51 mm on the front glacis. Its initial main gun, a 75 mm MN3, was effective against earlier German tanks, but struggled against the frontal armor of the Panzer IV G and later, and was almost useless against a Tiger from the front. American doctrine, influenced by its experiences in World War I, emphasized infantry support and breakthroughs, with tanks acting as mobile artillery and anti-tank roles handled by dedicated tank destroyers. This led to a very different kind of tank. The Sherman was fast, with a top speed of around 30 M4 48 km/h, and highly maneuverable. Its radial aircraft engine, while a fire hazard when hit, was remarkably powerful and reliable. Crucially, it was easy to fix in the field. A broken track on a Tiger could take days to repair and require specialized equipment. A Sherman track could be replaced in hours by its crew. Its modular design meant components could be swapped out quickly, keeping tanks in the fight. But the Sherman's greatest strength was its sheer numbers. While Germany struggled to produce a few dozen Tigers a month, America was churning out thousands of Shermans. Over 49,000 M4 Shermans were built during the war, making it the second most produced tank of worker, only surpassed by the T-34. This industrial capacity was a strategic weapon in itself. The philosophical clash between the Tiger and the Sherman represented the broader strategic divergence of Germany and the Allied powers. Germany, a nation with limited resources and facing a war of attrition on multiple fronts, pursued a strategy of qualitative superiority. They aimed to build the best, most technologically advanced weapons, hoping that a few supertanks could hold off many lesser ones. Hitler himself often favored designing increasingly complex and powerful machines, believing in the inherent superiority of German engineering to overcome numerical disadvantages. This led to a series of Wunderwaffen, or wonder weapons, of which the Tiger was a prime example. These machines were often over-engineered, difficult to manufacture, and prone to mechanical breakdowns. Their reliance on bespoke parts and highly skilled labor meant production was slow, and maintenance in the field was a nightmare. Every Tiger lost was a massive drain on Germany's already strained industrial base. America, on the other hand, had a doctrine based on overwhelming material superiority. Their strategy was to produce reliable, easy-to-use equipment in vast quantities. The Sherman was good enough, and there were always more where that came from. The individual loss of a Sherman, while tragic for its crew, was a statistic quickly replaced by another tank rolling off the production line. This philosophy allowed the Allies to absorb losses and maintain relentless pressure, a luxury Germany simply could not afford. The true battle was not fought one-on-one between a Tiger and a Sherman. It was fought between the entire industrial capacities of two warring civilizations. The first combat deployment of the Tiger I occurred not in the vast steppes of Russia, but in the muddy hills of Tunisia in late 1942. A small number of Tigers from the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion were sent to counter the Allied landings of Operation Torch. Their debut was a terrifying shock to the American and British forces. On December 1, 1942, 4 Tigers engaged a column of American M3 Stuart light tanks, destroying 9 of them in minutes without taking a single penetrating hit in return. The American 37mm guns were completely useless against the Tiger's thick hide. A few weeks later, another Tiger was hit multiple times by a British 75mm anti-tank gun. The crew inside barely noticed the impacts, hearing only dull thuds as the shells harmlessly shattered against the armor. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Allied intelligence reports, filled with the panicked accounts of shell-shocked survivors, began to build the legend of the invincible German supertank. This early success, however, masked a series of deep systemic flaws that would plague the Tiger for its entire service life. The Tiger was a masterpiece of over-engineering. Its intricate design required specialized manufacturing techniques and high-quality materials that were becoming increasingly scarce in wartime Germany. The production process was more akin to building a fine watch than mass-producing a weapon of war. Each Tiger required an astonishing 300,000 man-hours to produce, roughly twice that of the already complex Panther medium tank, and nearly 10 times that of a Sherman. This immense industrial cost meant the production was agonizingly slow. At its peak in April 1944, German industry managed to produce only 104 Tiger Es. In contrast, during that same month, American factories were churning out over 1,000 M4 Shermans. The final production numbers tell the whole story. Only 1,034 Tiger Is were ever built. America built over 49,000 Shermans. For every single Tiger that rolled out of the factory, the Allies were producing more than 36 Shermans. This staggering numerical disparity was a strategic reality that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome. Furthermore, the Tiger's colossal weight created a logistical nightmare. At 54 tons, it was too heavy for most bridges in Europe. This severely restricted its operational mobility. While a Sherman could cross a pontoon bridge or a small country bridge with ease, a Tiger often had to ford rivers, a time-consuming and dangerous process. To do this, the Tiger was equipped with an elaborate snorkel system, another piece of complex engineering that required meticulous preparation and was rarely used effectively in combat. The sheer weight also put immense strain on its transmission and engine. The Maybach HL230 engine, while powerful, was pushed to its absolute limit, and the complex hydraulic transmission was prone to catastrophic failure. More Tigers were lost to mechanical breakdown and a lack of fuel than to direct enemy action. German maintenance crews performed miracles to keep the beasts running. But they were fighting a losing battle against a design that was simply too heavy and too complex for the rigors of sustained combat. The Tiger's wide tracks, necessary for distributing its weight, were also a problem. For rail transport, the wide combat tracks had to be removed and replaced with narrower transport tracks, a grueling process that could take a crew hours to complete. This meant that the Tiger was often slow to deploy and difficult to move strategically. It was a tactical sledgehammer that was incredibly difficult to bring to the fight. In stark contrast, the M4 Sherman was a triumph of logistical pragmatism. Its design was ruthlessly optimized for mass production and ease of maintenance. It used standardized parts that could be produced by a multitude of subcontractors, from major automotive giants like Ford and Chrysler to smaller companies that had never built a tank before. This decentralized production model made it incredibly resilient to disruption. The Sherman's Wright R975 radial engine was a modified aircraft engine, a design that was already being produced in vast quantities. While not perfect, its high profile and tendency to catch fire when hit were notorious flaws. It was reliable and familiar to thousands of American mechanics. The Sherman was designed to be repaired in the field by its own crew if necessary. This high level of operational readiness meant that more Shermans were available for combat at any given time. While a German heavy panzer battalion might have half of its tanks out of action due to mechanical issues, an American Sherman battalion could often maintain an operational readiness rate of over 90%. This meant that the numerical advantage on paper was often even greater on the battlefield. The true test of these two opposing philosophies came in the brutal, close-quarters fighting of the Normandy campaign in the summer of 1944. The dense hedgerow country, the bocage, was a nightmare for tank warfare. It created a labyrinth of small fields, sunken lanes, and thick earthen walls restricting visibility to a few hundred yards. This environment, in theory, should have been a perfect hunting ground for the Tiger. Its thick armor could withstand ambushes, and its powerful gun could blast through the hedgerows and pick off Allied tanks. However, the reality was more complex. The bocage also negated the Tiger's biggest advantage, its long-range gun. Engagements were often at point-blank range, or even the Sherman's 75mm gun, firing armor. Piercing-capped APC rounds could sometimes find a weak spot in the Tiger's side or rear armor. The restricted terrain also made the Tiger's poor maneuverability a critical liability. It struggled to navigate the narrow lanes and tight turns, making it vulnerable to flanking attacks by more nimble Shermans. American and British tank crews, though terrified of the Tiger, quickly adapted their tactics. They learned that a head-on engagement was suicide. Instead, they relied on teamwork and numbers. A common tactic was for one Sherman to act as bait, firing at the Tiger from the front to attract its attention. As the Tiger's slow-turning turret traversed to engage the first Sherman, other Shermans would race to flank it, firing at its thinner side and rear armor. They also learned to aim for the Tiger's tracks or suspension, immobilizing the beast so that it could be destroyed by artillery or a close-in shot from a tank destroyer like the M10 or M36, which were armed with more powerful guns. They also used their high-explosive HE shells to blind the Tiger, shattering its optics and forcing the crew to button up, further reducing their already poor situational awareness. American crews also began to receive the M4A38 Easy 8 Sherman, which featured a more powerful 76mm gun and improved suspension. While still not a direct match for the Tiger's 88mm, the 76mm gun-firing new high-velocity armor, piercing HVAP rounds could penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor at medium ranges, giving Sherman crews a fighting chance. The British went even further, modifying the Sherman with their powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun, creating the Sherman Firefly. The Firefly was one of the few Allied tanks that could reliably kill a Tiger from the front at combat ranges, and they were often deployed specifically to hunt the German big cats. The story of Sergeant Lafayette, War Daddy, Poole of the U.S. 3rd Armored Division, exemplifies the Sherman's effectiveness. Poole and his crew, in their Sherman nicknamed In the Mood, are credited with destroying 258 enemy vehicles, including several Tigers and Panthers, before being knocked out of action. They survived not by having a better tank, but by being a better crew, using their Sherman's speed and reliability to outmaneuver and overwhelm their opponents. The Sherman was a tool that, in the hands of a skilled and aggressive crew, could be incredibly effective. It was a platform that allowed for tactical flexibility, something the lumbering, over-specialized Tiger lacked. The American doctrine wasn't about building a tank that could win a one-on-one duel. It was about building a tank that could win a campaign. The focus was on the operational level of war, not just the tactical. The Sherman could be shipped across oceans, driven across countries, and kept running in the harshest conditions. The Tiger could barely make it from the railhead to the battlefield without breaking down. The true battle was not between armor and gun, but between logistics and attrition. And in that battle, the humble Sherman was the undisputed champion. The industrial and logistical philosophies that defined the Tiger and the Sherman were not created in a vacuum. They were a direct reflection of the strategic realities and resource limitations faced by Germany and the United States. Germany, by 1943, was embroiled in a desperate multi-front war of attrition. Its access to critical raw materials like tungsten, molybdenum, and high-grade steel was severely limited by Allied bombing and naval blockades. This scarcity forced German engineers to make every weapon count. The Tiger was a product of this quality over quantity mindset, an attempt to create a tactical silver bullet that could offset the Allies' overwhelming numerical superiority. Every component of the Tiger was crafted to the highest possible standard, using the best available materials. The overlapping road wheels of its torsion, bar suspension for instance, were a complex design that provided a smooth ride and distributed the tank's immense weight. But they were a nightmare to produce and maintain. In the mud and ice of the Eastern Front, the wheels would freeze together overnight, immobilizing the tank until crews could thaw them out, often under enemy fire. This pursuit of artisanal perfection, while creating a formidable weapon in isolation, resulted in a logistical albatross that the German war machine could ill afford. The human cost of this philosophy was also immense. A Tiger crew consisted of 5 highly trained specialists, the commander, gunner, and loader in the turret, and the driver and radio operator in the hull. These men were often the cream of the Panzer Corps, veterans of multiple campaigns. When a Tiger was lost, Germany didn't just lose a valuable piece of hardware, it often lost an irreplaceable crew. The Allies, on the other hand, could train new Sherman crews far more quickly than Germany could train new Tiger crews. The American system emphasized standardized procedures and a good enough approach that allowed them to rapidly create competent crews and deploy them to the front. The loss of a Sherman and its crew was a tragedy, but it was a replaceable tragedy. The American war machine had a deep well of manpower and a training pipeline that ran around the clock. This ability to absorb and replace losses was a critical component of the Allied strategy of continuous grinding pressure. Beyond the production lines and battlefields, the strategic deployment of these tanks revealed another critical divergence. The Tigers were organized into independent heavy panzer battalions, Schwerpanzerabteilungen. These were elite fire brigade units moved from one crisis point to another along the front. They were rarely integrated into regular panzer divisions. This meant that while they were incredibly effective in blunting an Allied attack or spearheading a localized counterattack, their impact was often temporary and geographically limited. They would arrive, stabilize a sector, and then be pulled back to be refitted or sent to the next emergency. They could win a battle, but they couldn't hold the line. The Sherman, in contrast, was the backbone of the American armored divisions. It was everywhere. It provided direct fire support for the infantry. It exploited breakthroughs. It screened the flanks. And it fought tank-on-tank battles. It was a versatile, jack-of-all-trades weapon that was fully integrated into the American combined arms doctrine. This doctrine was America's true superweapon. An American armored division was a self-contained ecosystem of destruction. A group of Shermans encountering a Tiger wouldn't just fight it alone. The tank commander would get on the radio and call for support. Within minutes, P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers, the dreaded Jabos, could be circling overhead, ready to drop 500-pound bombs or fire high-velocity rockets that could tear a Tiger apart. Simultaneously, artillery observers would call in a fire mission from a nearby battery of 105mm or 55mm howitzers. While artillery rarely scored a direct killing blow on a Tiger, a sustained barrage could shatter its tracks, destroy its optics, and force the crew to abandon the vehicle. The Sherman's job was often not to kill the Tiger itself, but to fix it in place long enough for the rest of the American war machine to bring its overwhelming firepower to bear. The Tiger was designed to win a tank duel. The Sherman was designed to be part of a team that could win a war. The experience of a German Tiger crewman versus an American Sherman crewman was also profoundly different. A Tiger crew operated with a sense of technological invincibility, but also with crushing pressure. They knew their machine was a high-value asset, and the expectations were immense. They also had to deal with the constant fear of mechanical failure, or running out of fuel, stranded deep in enemy territory. The inside of a Tiger was relatively spacious for a tank of its era, but it was filled with the constant anxiety of being the enemy's #1 priority. An American Sherman crew, on the other hand, operated with a sense of vulnerability, but also with a sense of overwhelming support. They knew their tank was outmatched by the German heavyweights, and this fostered a culture of caution, teamwork, and reliance on supporting arms. They knew that if they got into trouble, the Air Force was above them, the artillery was behind them, and more Shermans were right beside them. The famous, though likely apocryphal, quote attributed to a German panzer general sums it up. "The Americans have some of the worst tanks in the world, but they have the best tank crews." This wasn't necessarily true in terms of individual skill, but it spoke to the effectiveness of the American system, which empowered its crews and integrated them into a larger, unstoppable force. By late 1944, the tide had irrevocably turned. The relentless Allied bombing campaign had crippled German industry, reducing the production of Tigers and their even larger successors, the Tiger II, or King Tiger, to a mere trickle. The few that made it to the front were starved of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. During the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last great offensive in the West, entire columns of King Tigers were abandoned on the roads, not destroyed by enemy fire, but simply because their gas tanks were empty. The once mighty panzer divisions were a shadow of their former selves. Meanwhile, the Sherman continued to improve. The introduction of the 76mm gun became more widespread, and the new HVAP ammunition gave it a fighting chance against German heavy armor. The Easy 8 Sherman, with its improved suspension and more powerful gun, was a match for anything short of a Tiger, and even then, it could hold its own. The sheer number of Shermans, combined with their improved firepower and the overwhelming air and artillery support, created a meat grinder that the technologically superior but numerically inferior German tanks could not survive. The myth of the invincible Tiger was shattered not by a single superweapon, but by 1,000 cuts from 1,000 humble Shermans. In the final, desperate months of the war, from the frozen forests of the Ardennes to the rubble-strewn streets of Berlin, the operational philosophies of the Tiger and the Sherman reached their inevitable conclusions. The Tiger, and its even more formidable successor, the 70-ton Tiger II, remained masters of the tactical defensive battle. A well-positioned King Tiger could hold a crossroads or a bridge against an entire Allied armored company, racking up an astonishing number of kills before being overwhelmed or forced to retreat. The Battle of the Bulge was filled with such stories, but these were isolated acts of defiance, tactical victories in the midst of a catastrophic strategic defeat. They were the final, glorious roars of a dying beast. For every Sherman a King Tiger destroyed, 10 more would appear on the horizon. The German war diary of a heavy panzer battalion from this period is a litany of frustration. Engaged and destroyed 7 enemy tanks, forced to withdraw due to lack of fuel. 2 Tigers lost to mechanical failure, a waiting recovery team that will never come. Under constant attack from enemy fighter bombers, unable to maneuver. The war for Germany was no longer about winning. It was about managing an unstoppable collapse. The American war machine, in contrast, had become a finely tuned instrument of industrial-scale warfare. The logistical chain that supported the Sherman was a modern marvel. From the factories in Detroit, tanks were shipped to ports in Europe, offloaded, and sent to vast depots where they were readied for combat. Mobile repair battalions, operating just behind the front lines, could perform complex repairs, swap out entire engines, or even cannibalize heavily damaged tanks to get others back into the fight. This relentless focus on logistics ensured that American commanders always had what they needed most: options. They could afford to be aggressive, to probe, to flank, and to accept losses, knowing that their supply of men and machines was, for all practical purposes, limitless. The Sherman, with its reliability and interchangeability, was the perfect instrument for this style of war. It was a weapon that reflected America's greatest strengths: its industrial power, its logistical genius, and its pragmatic problem-solving mindset. When the final surrender came in May 1945, the surviving Tigers and Shermans stood as silent monuments to their respective nations' doctrines. The few remaining Tigers were often found abandoned, hulking, magnificent machines defeated not by enemy shells, but by empty fuel tanks and broken transmissions. They were symbols of a nation that had reached for technological perfection, but had lost sight of the strategic realities of modern warfare. The Shermans were everywhere, thousands of them, battered, bruised, but still running. They were symbols of a nation that had understood that in a global war of attrition, good enough, in overwhelming numbers, is always superior to a few perfect but irreplaceable machines. The final tally was stark. The Western Allies lost thousands of tanks, a significant portion of them Shermans. But for every tank they lost, another was ready to take its place. Germany's panzer forces were, by the end, almost completely annihilated, with no replacements available. The post-war analysis of this armored conflict has been a source of endless debate. Tank enthusiasts and model builders will forever argue the merits of the Tiger's 88mm gun versus the Sherman Firefly's 17-pounder. But to focus on these tactical duels is to miss the larger, more profound lesson. The story of the Tiger versus the Sherman is not really a story about tanks. It's a story about systems. Germany created a system that produced exquisite, tactically brilliant weapons that were ultimately unsustainable. America created a system that produced reliable, adaptable weapons in overwhelming quantities, supported by a logistical network that was the true marvel of the war. The Tiger was a beautiful, deadly predator, but it was an evolutionary dead end, perfectly adapted for a type of battle that was already becoming obsolete. The Sherman was a resilient, adaptable pack animal, and in the brutal ecosystem of World War II, the pack always triumphs over the lone hunter. Today, the M4 Sherman is often remembered with a degree of derision, the Ronson that burned too easily, the tank that was a death trap. But this popular memory, fueled by a handful of dramatic accounts, obscures the deeper truth. For the hundreds of thousands of infantrymen who fought alongside it, the Sherman was a welcome sight. It was the reliable workhorse that was always there, providing the fire support they needed to take the next town, to cross the next river. It was the tank that, through its sheer ubiquity and persistence, ground down the mighty German war machine. The Tiger, for all its fame and fearsome reputation, remains a historical curiosity, a symbol of tactical brilliance untethered from strategic reality. Its legacy is one of what might have been. The Sherman's legacy is written in the history of the victory it helped to achieve. It was the humble, unassuming, and utterly indispensable engine of Allied victory, a testament to the idea that wars are not won by the best weapon, but by the best system for producing, deploying them, and sustaining them.